Hey there, welcome to the forecast for Monday, December 30th, 2024 through Sunday, January 5th, 2025. This week we do have a new moon in Capricorn, so that's further shifting this transition, really diving into Capricorn season. So we're going to talk about what that means. And otherwise, the moon will be traveling from Sagittarius or Capricorn all the way through the beginning of Aries. I say Sagittarius or Capricorn because depending on your time zone, you may start out the very first couple hours of Monday with the moon in either Sagittarius or Capricorn. But either way, moon is kind of transiting over these sort of wintry signs: Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, etc. And this is a sort of bumpy area for the moon to transit through. This is not a super big deal. We go through this at least about once a month. But we will have the moon in detriment in Capricorn, a bit out of place in Aquarius. Moon tends to do much better in Pisces, in my opinion. And then again, moon is a bit out of place in Aries. So it's a little bit out of place in this general region, but nothing to be too concerned about. I do think this week will actually be much smoother than last week, because last week we had so many of these T-squares, and you can see that here. This is actually the chart for Sunday, December 29th, so technically one day before the scope of this forecast. And you can see even on Sunday we're still dealing with those the T-squares: Jupiter 13 Gemini, Saturn 14 Pisces, and both of those are being triggered with this T-square from Mercury and the moon roughly halfway through Sagittarius. So basically, that's just something that really was unfolding in different ways. It was unfolding all throughout the week, first with that exact square between Jupiter and Saturn, and then Mercury and the moon moving into halfway Sagittarius, making that T-square. So basically with those T-squares, last week was very tense. So that is dissipating this week for sure. You can see here, even on Monday, December 30th, moon has already left Sagittarius, gone into Capricorn. And so we're really shifting the focus here in a dramatic way. Mercury's also leaving the post shadow this week. So this is the last time you're going to hear me talk about this whole retrograde that we dealt with this past month. We are fully leaving that, fully moving out of that. And I was just slowing down because I was thinking myself just how powerful that Mercury retrograde period was, and even the post shadow has been very powerful as well. So we're finally leaving all of that, fully moving ahead, fully moving into new and uncharted territory. And really we can see that both with Mercury leaving the post shadow and with the new moon. Both are saying that we are completely moving forward. So I think that's something to be excited about. And again, we're moving forward not in a super dramatic, intense way. I think this week will actually be smoother than last week. Let's get into it. Let's go through these details here. We also have a planet changing signs this week, which is pretty exciting because it's going to be exalted there. So if you don't already know what it is, you probably do, but if not, I'll tell you that during this forecast, of course. But before we get into the day-by-day forecast, I did want to let you know all personal readings are currently 50% off for the rest of the year, so definitely take advantage of that. This puts my birth chart reading rate at only $29 US currency. So yeah, definitely check that out if you're interested. You can check out my website, manic.mercurian.net, or you can also email me at manic.mercurian@gmail.com. Okay, but let's start out with the day-by-day forecast. So for Monday, December 30th, definitely the main event is the new moon in Capricorn, which will happen at 9 degrees Capricorn. And so I really like this new moon. Technically, moon is in detriment, so we always go through this theme with moon in Capricorn of being a little bit emotionally unsettled and not always receiving a lot of nurturing from our environment. But this has a couple silver linings. This forces us to be independent, and it also forces us, well, it doesn't force us, but it kind of asks us or provokes us to be more ambitious. If you're not currently satisfied with the status quo, if you're a little bit unsettled, in a way that's actually okay, because it's pushing you to work harder, to plan, to strategize. That's really the silver lining that we have with moon in Capricorn, especially new moon in Capricorn. And really a new moon in Capricorn, despite it being in detriment, in a way it's actually very fitting, because the new moon is a great time of setting intentions, thinking about what you want for the next several weeks ahead. And Capricorn is also an excellent time for thinking ahead, planning things, strategizing. So when you combine the two, new moon and Capricorn, the themes actually tend to be very conducive to one another. They tend to work very well. In short, it's just a very excellent time for setting intentions, planning. These could be any kind of intentions. They could be spiritual, mental, psychological intentions, or they could be very physical, very literal in nature as well. And for more specific information, you can always look to where does 9 degrees Capricorn fall in your chart, because that is likely the area of a new beginning. This isn't the type of new beginning of, we're going out like guns blazing and we're going to mess stuff up and do stuff and it's super active and volatile. This is not, it's not typically the nature of the new moon. I wouldn't expect that to be the nature of this new moon. This is a new beginning in the sense of kind of what I was saying, setting a new intention, having a dream, an idea, a new feeling. This is like the very beginning, okay? The first quarter moon, which we always experience it about 1 week after the new moon. That's the kind of new beginning that some people might think of, really making a dramatic change, taking some kind of physical or literal action. That happens on the first quarter moon. We're not there quite yet. This is more just about, what do we want? What do we want to think of, to dream, to manifest, etc. So that's really what I would kind of advise for Monday. But otherwise, honestly, it looks like sort of a sleepy Monday. I believe that the new moon is the least volatile part of the lunar cycle because it's the time where the moon has the least light. It has basically no light at all. So, the more light the moon has, generally the more active things are. Of course, things are especially active on the quarter moons and of course the full moon where it has the most light. But yeah, generally that energy is kind of a metaphor for activity or energy. So with the moon at its darkest point, and also being so close to the winter solstice as well, this is very literally a very dark time. But that darkness, it's not evil, it's not bad necessarily. Having that darkness allows us to see our own light, so to speak. It allows us to be more cognizant of ourselves, and it allows us to, it gives us more room to kind of imagine things or to theorize, to brainstorm, to strategize, etc. We're not so blinded by all the activity, all the energy that's going on outside of ourselves, so we can look within more. So that's really what this energy is all about. Oh, one last thing too. So looking at the aspects of this new moon, something that I was honestly excited to see is that this new moon really doesn't have any aspects, no major ones at least that I can see. Again, the new moon is at 9 degrees Capricorn, so the moon is of course conjunct the sun. That's what a new moon is. But other than that, you could say there's a somewhat loose sextile between the new moon at 9 Capricorn sextiling Saturn at 14 Pisces. So if we use an orb of 5 degrees, there is that sextile. Sextiles are not the most major aspect. They do tend to be, well, they are very harmonious, but they're a little bit subtle though. They're not always like consistently in your face. You know what I mean? So and if you use let's say we use a 7 degree orb, then we could actually say that this is part of a quincunx with Jupiter 13 Gemini, Mars at 2 Leo. The quincunx is also not super major, but if we do apply that though and think about that, then that would suggest that this new moon is bringing something up within us that is fundamentally at odds with the way things are now. It's really strange though, because both Mars and Jupiter are retrograde, so they're both they're there, but they're sort of asleep. Their energies are going within. Mars and Jupiter are typically so active, so volatile. They're so much having to do with expansion. But because they're both retrograde, really that, it's almost like the brakes are kind of being pumped on both of those. We're being, I don't know, maybe more strategic with our expansion, with our ambitions, etc. So that's going on. And then with that new moon, technically making a loose quincunx, a loose yod, that's the word I was thinking of, a loose yod with Jupiter and Mars. A yod is some kind of awkward, kind of bittersweet situation that doesn't really have any solution. So you have to just kind of let it pass. So applying, the yod, and then also considering this new moon has the moon in detriment, this does seem like an awkward energy. It's bittersweet. It's very mixed. I hope that makes sense. So it is a great time for starting new intentions, but we may not know kind of what the bigger picture is right now. There may be a lot of kind of chips up in the air, so to speak. Something I haven't mentioned yet is that we're still going through that Mars-Pluto opposition that I know many of you are aware of. We've been going through that for a long time. That will be exact later this week. So really, when you think about it, I do still stand by what I said, that this week looks a little bit smoother than last week. However, there is this kind of awkwardness in the air. I think there are a lot of unknowns right now. So we're kind of slowly starting to figure out, I think we're really wanting to plan things. That's typical for this time of year. But we may not be able to do so because there's this intensity and there may be a lot of unknowns or uncertainty right now. Let's go ahead. Hopefully this will make more sense as we continue. So for Tuesday, December 31st, Moon continues through Capricorn. It's still, still has little to no light at this point. What's interesting is I was just talking about that Mars-Pluto opposition, and the Moon is actually headed toward Pluto. So the Moon will kind of tick that off. So we'll talk about that when we get there. Right now, though, for Tuesday, there's only one major aspect, and that would be Mercury trining Chiron. So Mercury at 19 Sagittarius, trining Chiron at 19 Aries. So this looks like a great aspect for facilitating some kind of deep conversation, maybe a deep conversation about something that would typically be triggering, like a personal trauma, personal wound. We may be able to have more of those conversations and really open up maybe to each other or to the bigger picture, rather than solely focusing on our own wounds and just dwelling on it ourselves. We may be able to open up and connect with others, maybe learn something new, or again, maybe just facilitate those conversations about those heavy topics. One last thing about that, something I mentioned earlier that I know some of you resonated with in a previous forecast, is that Chiron energies are awkward. So I always tend to bring that up with any Chiron aspect. Yes, it does have to do with increased empathy, but that's actually exactly why it's awkward. Not all of us are ready to have certain deep conversations. So, Chiron brings these things up whether we like it or not. So this is a trine. It does look very harmonious, but it on the one hand, it can be a really great time for having those deep conversations, but on the other hand, it may bring stuff up to the surface that some people may not feel ready to share that yet or to dive into that. So that's where it can be uncomfortable or awkward. Going to Wednesday, January 1st, we have no exact aspects, but we are honing in on that Mars-Pluto opposition that we've been feeling building up for weeks now. And this is especially relevant because early in the day, Eastern time, we have Moon leaving Capricorn and entering Aquarius. And as the Moon does so, it crosses Pluto and opposes Mars. And you can see Mars and Pluto are within, less than a degree from making that exact opposition at this point. So, what does that mean? I think the Mars-Pluto opposition, it's interesting because Mars is traveling slower than it usually does because it's retrograde. So this has been just slowly building. Pluto is so slow. Pluto's always slow. It's basically stationary all the time. So with Mars traveling slower than usual and Pluto being its normal slow self, it's just been this building of this tension. Both Mars and Pluto are malefics. They're sort of troublemakers, or as the ancients would say, evil planets in astrology. So they both are disruptive. They both disturb the status quo. Can that be a good thing? Absolutely. We need Mars and Pluto in order to advance, to evolve, to become stronger, right? But doing so is difficult. It's kind of like no pain, no gain. I feel like that saying would apply to both Mars and Pluto. So that's been building up, and there's been a lot of tension that we've been experiencing in many different parts of our lives, and even, dare I say, Mars oppositions, especially with other malefics, they can trigger violent accidents. So again, look to where one Leo, one Aquarius falls in your chart. It's really interesting because technically this aspect is exact on Friday. However, the reason why I'm giving it so much detail right now is with the Moon crossing over Pluto, sometimes an aspect like that where another body, another planet kind of moves through the aspect and triggers it, sometimes that can be more triggering than the aspect itself. So in other words, even though this aspect is exact on Friday, we may feel that even more on Wednesday because it's so close to exact and the Moon is crossing over. It was kind of the same concept last week where we had Jupiter and Saturn squaring on, I believe, Tuesday, but then Moon and Mercury crossing through Sagittarius, making that T-square much later in the week over the weekend. So it's kind of the same concept here. Moon is bringing our emotional focus, our attention to Pluto. It's bringing up some challenging themes, bringing up that whatever we want to sweep under the rug, and any of our like traumas or insecurities that we think we've dealt with but we've kind of just put away on a shelf somewhere. Pluto brings all that up to the surface for us to deal with. And so that's especially true with the moon crossing over Pluto, and again, both of them are opposing Mars in the process. So yeah, it's bringing something up for you to work with. In a way, it reminds me of Chiron, like we were just talking about, because Pluto, it destroys things, and it in many ways Pluto is very negative. I think it brings up darkness, it brings up destruction, but that can be good, though. That can be, I guess, positive in a way. Pluto can destroy what's no longer working. It can bring insecurities up for you to deal with them in order to become stronger. So you can use this to your advantage, but it is a very dark, very heavy energy. Pluto is one of the most difficult energies, and being triggered through this opposition from Mars, that just makes it that much more volatile as well. So there's a lot of pressure on us right now, and we may be changing on a very deep level, and we may be rethinking our ambitions as well. That's part of this too. So I feel bad. I said this week was going to be so easy, but we do have a couple dark things to work with. So maybe not overall as volatile as last week, but there still are some exceptions for sure. Going to Thursday, January 2nd, this is some good news, I would say. So Moon continues through Aquarius. A lot of Saturnian energies with Sun in Capricorn, Moon in Aquarius. And we're still narrowing in even more on that Mars-Pluto opposition. So a lot of tense energy. But the good news is that Venus leaves Aquarius and enters Pisces late in the day Eastern time here. So the reason why that's good is because Venus is exalted in Pisces. So it's generally a favorable transit for basically for everyone. What was I going to say? I mean, especially people that have placements in Pisces, major Pisces placements, or maybe other water placements. Venus is moving into your sign, or maybe moving into your element, and so it's going to be supporting you in a more direct way. But for the rest of us as well, we all benefit from having one of the great benefics in one of her home signs, or her sign of exaltation. We haven't had that from Jupiter. Jupiter's been in detriment for quite some time now, since early last year. So that has been kind of a deficit. So I think we've really felt it whenever Venus is also in detriment or debilitated. Having both the benefics debilitated, it's really hard to connect with the pleasure, and I think it can have economic ramifications as well that are challenging too. So the point is, Venus is entering Pisces, where she's at home. This generally makes it easier for us to connect with our abundance, our pleasure. Venus is really just off the rails in Pisces. Venus in Pisces is all about, falling in love, not just with one person, but with humanity itself, or with the world, with the cosmos. It's just like I'm picturing like a cup of love just like spilling over. It's on ecstasy or something. It's, multiplied by 1,000, whatever, however you want to put it. But, that is generally good. But, definitely look to where Pisces falls in your chart, because that shows an area that Venus is bringing you pleasure. Venus is bringing abundance. Venus, because it's one of the two great benefics, it's one of the easiest planets to work with. It generally brings joy, good times, easiness, etc. So yeah, look to where Pisces is in your chart to see where you're going to have that fun, that pleasure, the abundance. Whatever major placements you have in Pisces, they have been challenged lately with Saturn and Neptune going over. Any placement you've had in Pisces has been challenged for the last couple of years. But you get a temporary, kind of like a break with Venus crossing over this area. Venus is going to be bringing you some good gifts, so to speak, some pleasure or abundance. Friday, January 3rd, this is where we have the exact Mars-Pluto aspect. You can see that in this kind of glaring red line going right across the chart. Finally, we get this exact opposition. And something I was going to mention earlier, so kind of like what I was just saying with Venus, look to where 0 or 1, I think technically it happens at 1 degree of Leo and Aquarius. Look to where 1 degree of Leo and Aquarius fall in your chart, because that is the area of some kind of contention, violence, deep transformation. I don't know how else to describe it. It's just a really intense pressure that's forcing you to grow and evolve. And you may be rethinking your ambitions there as well in whatever area of your chart that is. So, and really it's an opposition, so it's 2 points. It's going to be affecting 2 opposite points in your chart. So is it affecting your 4th and 10th house? Then that means it's your work-life balance that this is triggering. Is it your 1st and 7th house? That means it's a personal relationship. It's triggering how you relate to other people or how you relate to a relationship, etc. If it's near your sun, then you yourself are on the hot seat. You're going to have to change in a really deep way with this aspect, etc. I could go on. You can always ask me any specific questions if you'd like, or just comment them or email me. But yeah, this is tense for all of us though. And like I said, this isn't something that just happens on Friday. We've been feeling this building for weeks, and we will continue to feel it gradually dissipate for weeks after this. But it is, whether we like it or not, it's forcing us to change and move on to a new level in a really deep way. Quick shout out too to the moon. So Friday, the moon does enter Pisces, and as it does so, it crosses over Venus. So that's like the whole theme of this forecast, that even though Venus enters Pisces on Thursday, we may feel it even more on Friday. So that is really nice. It's like we have the poison and the antidote at the same time. The Mars-Pluto aspect doesn't really aspect Venus and the moon. I guess you could technically say it does, but they're really minor aspects. Venus and the moon quincunx Mars and make a semi-sextile with Pluto. So not major aspects, they are minor aspects. But what am I trying to say? But the moon crossing over Venus, that does connect us to a sweeter side of things. So it's really interesting. We have both at the same time. We have one thing that's like making us edgy, and we're dealing with the pressure and moving on to this new level, dealing with a lot of really deep, heavy stuff and baggage. But then at the same time, Moon and Venus in Pisces are suggesting, don't fight it, go with the flow. I love Moon in Pisces. Venus in Pisces is exalted. I mean, that's objectively a positive transit, but Moon in Pisces as well is I think it's very harmonious energy. It's kind of sort of like a hippie energy. It's saying we can be vulnerable and just be nurturing, be sweet, kind of put our guard down. In many ways, it's very much the opposite of this Pluto opposition to Mars. So both are true at the same time, though. I mean, I think that's the theme lately is, we have to do our best, and, we have to make use of what we have and be strategic and be diligent. But at the same time, we also have to surrender to some extent and just go with the flow. We're never going to fully know what's going on. We're never fully going to understand everything. So of course, as much as we do try to understand our lives and look for patterns and do our best, at the end of the day, there's always going to be some level of mystery, and that's really what these Pisces planets, I think, kind of show us. So both are true at the same time. There is this pleasant sweetness today, but there's also this peak of intensity at the same time. So honestly, that's hard to even wrap my head around as I say it, but I can guarantee you, as we go through Friday, you're going to totally understand, and I'll totally understand as we go through this exactly what that feels like. Let's talk about the weekend. So going into Saturday, January 4th, Sun sextiles Saturn. And this is interesting because Moon is there for that as well. So Moon conjunct Saturn at 14 Pisces, and right as that happens, Sun is at 14 Capricorn. So they make that sextile to each other. I think Capricorn Pisces sextiles are, at the face of it, they seem kind of weird, because usually with always technically with signs that sextile, they are different enough to be complementary in nature, but they are similar enough to blend fairly readily, if that makes sense. So at first glance, Pisces and Capricorn seem so dramatically different, it's hard to imagine a harmonious aspect between the two of them. Capricorn is more of like a cynical energy. It's all about planning and structure. Pisces is one of the least structured signs. It's more, just go with the flow, as we've been talking about, and Pisces is a much more optimistic energy as well. But they do combine really beautifully, I think, especially because in different ways, Pisces and Capricorn both have to do with like dreams or planning or kind of envisioning things. So together, I think it's a really excellent combination for just that, for coming up with a dream and making sure that it's actually attainable, and making a plan. How do you want to improve your life? What do you see for yourself, not just physically, literally, financially, but also spiritually and emotionally. Between Pisces and Capricorn, we can really consider all the different aspects of what makes a dream, what makes a reality, what makes a happy life, etc. Whatever it is that you want. So my point is, I think it's really, really excellent strategizing or planning energy, especially because this is Saturn that's being involved after all. And really, I almost feel like they're in mutual reception. I know technically they're not. Sun is not in domicile in Pisces, but my point is I think they'd be more comfortable in each other's signs, if that makes sense. So it's like a little bit reminiscent of mutual reception. Sun is in the home of Saturn, and Saturn's in Pisces, which I think the Sun would be more comfortable in than Capricorn. The Sun has more light when it's in Pisces. So anyway, I do think this is a very harmonious aspect, especially for planning. Moon, because it's at this phase, it's at a waxing crescent at this point, so it's really showing whatever that new beginning was that happened with the Capricorn New Moon on Monday. At this point in the lunar cycle, we're starting to see the moon's light, and therefore we're starting to see kind of the physical ramifications of this new dream, this new plan, this new intention, etc. So I think Saturn being there for that, and Moon conjoining Saturn as they both sextile the Sun, it really just makes all that much more concrete as well. We're coming up with a new dream, a new plan, a new reality, and we're doing so in a very concrete way with this sextile to Saturn. All right, and then lastly for Sunday, January 5th, no aspects today, but we will have the Moon transit through the end of Pisces. It'll actually be conjunct Neptune early in the day, Eastern time, and then by late afternoon, Moon will enter Aries, and it'll actually conjoin the North Node as it does so. Again, we have a shift. Transits through Pisces are always a little weird because the Moon has to go through Saturn and Neptune, so it channels in these really weird kind of otherworldly, outer planet energies, really long-term, big picture energies, before the Moon enters the much more straightforward sign of Aries. So early in the day, it's really strange. I think the last half of the day is going to feel very different than the beginning. The beginning is very, very dreamy, not just because of Moon in Pisces, but also Moon crossing over Neptune. So very dreamy, very foggy, very kind of wishy-washy. But again, definitely by the evening Eastern time, Moon enters Aries and things become much more clear, much more crisp. And also much more heated, not only because the Moon is in a fire sign, but also because the Moon will gradually begin to form a first quarter square to the Sun in Capricorn. We're going to save that for next week. We'll talk about the quarter moon next week. We'll also talk about the nodes changing signs, and we have an inner planet changing sign. So I hope that makes sense for you. I hope you have a fantastic New Year's. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.